When I was a child, there were rumors that the priest in our town was doing things that were not allowed in the church. These comments originated because he had been at the church for more than 10 years, and usually, they were replaced within 1 or 2 years. Moreover, the parish staff never spoke about him, as if it were strictly forbidden, or perhaps out of fear. On top of that, at least one person would disappear once a month, whether an adult or a teenager, but always a female. It was one night, which I thought would be as normal as any other, that I ended up witnessing something you would only see in movies. That evening, I was sitting on the furniture in my house, right by the living room window, which allowed a perfect view of the street. I was reading a book my father had given me from a fantasy saga, and at that hour, silence reigned. Nothing distracted me, and I took advantage of it until my eyes closed by themselves. That's when I saw through the window a man dressed like the priest, but his face seemed different. I couldn't confirm it was him, but he kept looking around frequently, as if he didn't want anyone to follow or see him. I was filled with curiosity, and something inside me told me that I had to go out and see where he was going. That's exactly what I did. I opened the door silently and hid in the shadows of the trees as we passed street after street. The surprise came when he walked towards the woods and went into them. I didn't understand why he would do that, or for what purpose, but I had to pick up my pace so I wouldn't lose him among the trees. The sounds of the animals around there muffled the noise of my footsteps, which were relatively close. On 1 or 2 occasions, I was afraid he would discover me, but it didn't happen. Finally, we reached a part of the woods lit with torches, and several people were standing on a pile of straw, dressed in black robes. I recognized all of them. They were the ones who helped the priest at Mass with the offerings, the altar boys, and all that. I didn't understand what they were doing there, but then I could see the man I was following more clearly. Yes, it was the priest, but the whole time I was following him, he seemed like a different person, unrecognizable. But that wasn't what left me stunned. It was the fact that, from among all the straw where these people were standing, a girl emerged who had no pupils. Her eyes were completely white, and her mouth was open, letting out a copious amount of saliva that soaked her clothes. They all had very large silver crucifixes, and they pointed them toward the girl, as the priest walked over and placed his hand on her forehead. From the contact between his fingers and her skin, smoke rose as it burned her, and instead of screaming, she seemed to growl or roar, a sound that drove away all the nearby animals. I didn't know a human could make such a sound, and from where I was, it was clear she was in pain. The priest began to recite words in a very strange language that I obviously couldn't understand, holding the Bible in his hands while with the other, he sprinkled holy water on the girl, which seemed to evaporate upon touching her. It was an extremely shocking scene. I had to lean my hands on a tree to keep myself from falling because my legs were trembling uncontrollably, and fear had paralyzed me to the point where I couldn't even turn around and go back the way I had come to that place. The girl began to rise as if levitating, but the straw wouldn't let me confirm that. I didn't know if she was truly doing it without help, or if there was something beneath her causing such an effect or phenomenon. I noticed the horrified expressions of those surrounding the girl and the priest, who kept talking and talking. The girl started to speak in a deep, thick voice, mocking the priest and saying she was going to kill everyone there. That voice sent shivers down my spine. I cried without even realizing the tears were streaming down my cheeks. Finally, something dark, and at the same time, semi-transparent, came out of the girl's body, and she immediately dropped her arms as she fell backward onto the straw, no longer giving the impression that she was levitating. Everyone rushed to her immediately, and some dropped their crucifixes. It was then that I heard 2 of them say that the exorcism had been successfully performed, but that the girl had not survived. The priest confirmed this by checking her vital signs, and he was the one who decreed that the body could not be found. 2 of those present grabbed shovels and took the body to a more remote and secluded part of the woods. I decided I would not follow them for anything in the world. If they discovered me, who knows if I would be the next one buried. I ran out of there until I got back to my house, and I swore I would never say anything about it. Months later, those rumors came out, and a lady said that the priest somehow hid his face at night so no one would recognize him. Perhaps that's what he did the night I followed him, but I went on with my life, trying to forget what happened. These are things that only happen in remote towns far from the city, making it impossible for society to believe in such things. Walking through the village at night might sound like one of the most dangerous activities, especially if you do it alone and at midnight. I didn't think so, but having an encounter with a malevolent entity made me reconsider more than I ever imagined. It was so severe that I didn't smile again for more than 3 months because the trauma was overwhelming. My name is Raphael, and this is my story. At home, there were always fights between my mother and father, to the point where it would get physical. I was an only child, and I had to witness all of it because my mother would tell me that these issues were between them and that I shouldn't get involved. Even though it filled me with helplessness to see how my father spoke to her, treating her like trash, I cowardly obeyed, and so I found comfort in going out for a walk every time this happened. The event that traumatized me occurred on one of those nights. It must have been midnight because there was no one on the streets. People in the village tend to go to bed very early so they can get up at dawn to work, so the streets were completely deserted. But that didn't bother or scare me. It wasn't the first time I had gone out, so I was relaxed, counting on the fact that by the time I returned home, my parents would no longer be fighting. With any luck, I would find them asleep, and I prayed that would be the case. That's when I started hearing footsteps that were different from mine behind me. I turned around and saw a child in the distance who froze when he saw me, his hands pressed against his sides. It seemed strange to me, and I thought he might be lost, so I asked him. He didn't respond. Instead, he smiled, and I noticed he had very large teeth, especially the ones in the middle. It amused me a little, and I kept walking. I began to wonder how it was possible that I could hear his footsteps if he was so far away, more than 50 feet. I turned around again, and to my surprise, he wasn't as far away as he had been a moment ago. Less than 30 feet separated us, and I hadn't even heard him speed up his pace. I remembered then the story that was told in the village about a specter that appeared at night, and that under no circumstances should you smile at it. His teeth were quite amusing to me, and I realized then that this child must be what the stories were about. I quickened my pace and he imitated me. That started to make me very nervous, and even without looking at him, I felt the urge to laugh, a mix of amusement and nerves, which increased every second. Finally, the child spoke to me, and his voice was so shrill that I turned around and I couldn't hold back. I burst into laughter, which I quickly stifled by covering my mouth with my hands. The child's smile disappeared, and he looked at me with hatred. I understood at that moment that I had done something I shouldn't have, so I ran without thinking twice. I noticed a shadow growing and growing behind me until it caught up with me, enveloping me in darkness. I turned around, and the terror I felt made me stop. I was petrified to see that the child had transformed into a being dressed in black, tall, faceless, with skin white as snow. Bald, with fingers that had no nails, and skin made of who knows what. It was something I had never seen, not even in my worst nightmares. From its bare fingers, a kind of claws started to grow, crooked and very irregular. I knew I had to run as fast as I could, otherwise I wouldn't live to tell the tale. I ran more desperately than ever, not thinking about turning around, and that thing did the same. No matter how fast I went, it wasn't enough to lose it. It was catching up to me, and it finally did. One of its claws or nails grazed my foot, and the pain caused me to fall, scraping myself and ending up in even more pain. That thing showed no mercy. It immediately pounced on me and raised its arm to bring it down in a sharp blow, inflicting a wound on my chest that made me scream in pain, begging it to stop and let me go. When I saw it raise its arm again, I knew I wouldn't be able to withstand a second blow for anything in the world. And then I heard it, the sound of doors opening. They were the neighbors. As soon as the first one stepped out, that horrible thing vanished like smoke before they could see it, and the people came to help me. All my clothes were covered in blood, and from the shock I ended up fainting. They took me home since everyone knew each other in our small community, where they tended to my wounds. I don't remember anything that happened after I fainted until the next day when I woke up. Since then, it took me a long time to smile again, fearing that if I did, that thing would reappear in front of me. The only good thing that came out of this was that after what happened to me, my parents stopped fighting. Their concern for me brought them together, but even so, I wasn't grateful for what happened to me, something that almost cost me my life. Thank you for listening to my story. Good night. What I am about to tell you is how I lost all my friends due to simple curiosity, and by sheer coincidence I continued living with the memory and guilt of knowing that I could have prevented that tragedy. But we all let ourselves be carried away by the unknown, and the end was tragic. It turns out that in the village where we lived, there were rumors about a house deep in the woods where Victor Morales lived. He was a lonely but very strange man who died years ago, but everyone said his body was never found, even though they made people believe it was, burying who knows what in his place. This story drilled into my friends and my head, so one day we went to Victor's grave, and the names and dates matched, so in theory, it was his grave. A friend's grandmother had a picture of him from when he was alive, and that's when we proposed going to that house to confirm if Victor was still alive or if it was someone else. We already knew what he looked like, and we weren't lacking in courage. The problem was that we made the mistake of mixing it with stupidity and immaturity. And 2 days later, 2 friends and I ventured into the woods in the direction people said the house was. The whole way there felt fine, like an adventure. It took us 2 hours to find the house among the trees and all the underbrush we had to push through. From afar, we felt a chill of excitement at being the first to confirm the rumors that were going around in the village. We walked together, and that's how we reached the door and knocked. Nobody answered, so we took the liberty of entering on our own. The whole place was clean. We checked it thoroughly, room by room, until, in the last one, we were shocked to find a bed with a man sleeping in it. We pulled the sheet off his head and we confirmed it. It was Victor Morales, just like he appeared in the picture, as if time had stopped for him. The body didn't smell bad, but he had pronounced dark circles that seemed to be a result of malnutrition. One of my friends touched his hand, and that's when the nightmare began. Victor opened his eyes and, with a knife hidden in his other hand, stabbed my friend in the neck. Blood spurted out while we all screamed in horror, and faced with the shocking scene, we had to run because the one we thought was dead got up and started chasing us. Right there in the house, he caught up to my other friend and strangled him with his own hands while we tried to escape. I immediately went to help by hitting him with a wooden chair, but the blow seemed to do him no harm. He grabbed a piece of wood from the chair that broke when I hit him, chasing us down the long hallway of the house. We realized that fighting this man barehanded wasn't going to help at all. We were just teenagers barely growing up. We just wanted to have fun. The guy was full of rage because we had invaded his home, but more than anything, he seemed determined to ensure that the secret of him living there would never be revealed. The door was within our reach, and we didn't hesitate to run out in the direction of the village. Victor didn't leave the house, so we assumed we had been saved miraculously. We were very wrong about that. We saw him next to a tree half an hour later, with the bloodied knife he used to kill my friend. Thank God he didn't chase us, but he looked at us with great contempt and hatred, making a gesture of annoyance and a grunt, indicating he didn't want anyone else returning to his house. He simply disappeared into the underbrush, allowing us to return to the village. We didn't tell anyone the truth about what happened. I was so scared that he might show up at my house one night, ready to kill me for revealing his secret. So we made up a story that our friend fell into the river and drowned, getting lost in the current. A year later, the friend who survived with me left the village with his parents, and I was left with that secret to myself, with no one to confide in. Not telling the truth is something I regretted for so many years, but I'm sure that guy spent countless nights watching me from the darkness, waiting for me to say something so he could come in and kill me. As many nights I couldn't sleep because of the feeling of being watched, and I think I was always right. Hello community, my name is Tomas, and I want to tell you how a simple discomfort I experienced due to my alcohol addiction turned into the beginning of the worst experience of my life. If it hadn't been for a relative who arrived at just the right moment, I wouldn't be here to share this story. I had been drinking around town for 3 consecutive days, completely overindulging, and my family was getting more upset with every hour that passed without me returning home. Honestly, I was having fun. I couldn't deny it. I spent those 3 nights sleeping by the river, in the woods, and even on the street. I came back on the 4th day in the morning, not fully in my right mind, but determined to rest and stop drinking, at least for that week. My mother made me some food and gave me everything she could for the discomfort. It was just a simple hangover, not as bad as some of the unbearable ones I had had before. But I was no longer in my 20s. My body was aging and I could handle less and less. The next day, my symptoms worsened. My mother said maybe I drank something I shouldn't have, which always happened when I got drunk with people I had never spoken to before. So, she convinced me to go to the village healer so she could make me a remedy and help me feel a bit better, or at least rule out that it wasn't something other than the drinks. We arrived, and she took me to a hut in her backyard among the trees. They laid me down on a small bed there, and I waited while she went to get the ingredients to make a remedy for me. The tranquility and cool weather of that night relaxed me a lot. I wanted to sleep because I still felt very dizzy, and my mother had gone to find a cousin to stay with me since she needed to look after my grandmother. No one else was in the house. About half an hour passed, and finally the healer arrived. To be honest, when we arrived, my head was a mess, and I hadn't paid attention to her, but when I saw her, she was incredibly beautiful. I don't know if it was just me or what was going on, but her skin seemed to glow. It was very pale, although that didn't take away from her beauty. In her hands, she didn't have any jars, ingredients, or remedies, and I found that strange. As she stood next to me, she said she needed to light some candles and close the windows and the door to start her work. She needed to concentrate. There was only the dim light of the candles, and I had very little visibility. Besides that, I was very dizzy. The healer had her back to me, doing who knows what. And then she turned around. That beautiful face was now completely deformed. Her skin had turned so dark it looked burned, almost charred, with rashes that left me utterly shocked. Suddenly, she didn't have a single tooth left, and only her disgusting tongue could be seen. I got up as quickly as I could, but she reached me with incredible speed and grabbed me by the chest to throw me to the ground. Her strength was so overwhelming that when I fell to the floor and hit my back, I was on the verge of passing out. However, lying on the ground, I could no longer see her silhouette in the darkness. Then, I felt hands around my neck that I couldn't see, and they began to strangle me, giving me no chance to defend myself. I felt the air stop entering my lungs, feeling utterly desperate. I was even squeezing my own neck, trying to free myself because I couldn't touch the skin that was choking me. Even though I resigned myself to thinking that at that moment I was about to die, I didn't stop struggling while something strangled me. I fought with all my strength. Then, footsteps were heard running, and seconds later, my cousin burst into the hut, seeing me lying on the floor, fighting against something that neither he nor I could see. As soon as he touched me, those hands around my neck released me, and I began to gasp for air desperately. It took me 5 minutes to say a word, and the healer was nowhere to be seen. Later, I confirmed that my cousin couldn't see her, but I still told him what happened. As we left the hut, the real healer came out of her home with the remedy in her hands, and then I realized that the person who had entered wasn't who she claimed to be. The healer entered the hut and saw many things scattered on the floor and asked us what had happened and why my neck was covered in scratches. That's when I told her everything. She stood there thinking for a moment, and with a serious expression, she told me that I was very lucky my cousin arrived in time because that thing that appeared and attacked me was not human. There were many rumors that very dark entities inhabited that forest, pretending to be humans to take the souls of people who were caught off guard near the forest, because decades ago, Witches performed many rituals with human sacrifices to summon demons from the depths of that forest, where light never penetrates the treetops. I never went near that forest full of dark energies again. Even so, thanks to that experience, I was able to quit alcohol, and I am now improving my life. But I will never forget what I lived through. And I hope the people in my village never go near the forest, especially at night.